I guess, okay, why don't we get started? So today we're going to be visiting the Syrian capital city of Damascus. So if everyone could mute themselves, please. And so here we have a map of Syria. You notice to the north is Turkey, to the east is Iraq, to the south is Jordan, to the west is Lebanon and parts of Israel. And you can see where that little arrow points up to an area called the Golan Heights, the western part of which Israel occupies, and the eastern part is still part of Syria. Of course, Syria claims that all of the Golan Heights actually belong to it.
Excuse me,
So,
Bill. Hey, Bill, you want this to be recorded? You need to hit record at the bottom.
okay, I thought it said it was being recorded.
I did too, but the dot's not on.
Okay, so
the dot is blinking on mine.
Is it?
Recording.
Okay.
Yeah, it says recording.
All right. All right.
okay. So excavations on the outskirts of Damascus have led archaeologists to assert that the site has had human habitation since around 6300 BCE. In the 13th century, the Egyptians and Hittites fought over the Damascus region, and the conflict ended with a treaty whereby control of the area was given to the pharaoh, the famed pharaoh Ramses II. The Hebrew Bible gives several accounts of Damascus's history, mainly in relation to its interaction with the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. So, for example, the text mentioned King David's battles against the rulers of Damascus. On the left here, you see what we call the Hebrew Bible. I don't know how many of you know that it's referred to as the Tanakh, which is an acronym for the three sections of the Hebrew Bible: the Torah, or the law, the Nevi'im, the book of the prophets, and the Ketuvim, or the writings. So that's an acronym. And so the entire Hebrew Bible is referred to as the Tanakh. So beginning in 856 BCE, and you're going to see there's a whole series of conquests. So this whole region of the Middle East, and we saw this when we looked at Jerusalem, has been a continual area of conflict and conquest, mainly because of its primary location on trade routes, its close location to the Mediterranean Sea, etc. So in 856 BCE, the Assyrians began to invade, and in 732, after many campaigns, Damascus was conquered and became a province of the Assyrian Empire. You can see the extent of the Assyrian Empire here. In 532 BCE, the region was then conquered by the Persian Achaemenid Empire. So this was the large Persian Empire, which we associate with the great Persian rulers like Darius, etc. And you can see the extent of this empire. And Damascus formed a vital part of this Persian Empire, and it's mentioned many times by the Greek historian Herodotus. Then in 331 BCE, it was conquered by Alexander the Great. You see, it's a series of conquests. It's a war-torn area, is today and always has been. Following Alexander's death, it became a battleground between two empires, the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire. You can see on the map here, the Ptolemaic in green, which came to be associated with the kingdoms of Egypt, and the Seleucid Empire over here in orange. And that battle was eventually won by the Seleucids, in the person of Seleucus I, Nicator. Following the Seleucid Empire, the Romans conquered Damascus, brought it into a league of 10 cities, known as the Decapolis, the 10 cities. You can see Damascus up here at the top. They were in turn incorporated into the province of Syria, of which today's Israel, and specifically Jerusalem in Judea, was part. So when we talk about Roman conquest, it was this entire area known as the province of Syria that included Damascus and Jerusalem. The Romans actually, during the Pax Romana, which was from 27 BCE to 180 CE, Damascus became a thriving commercial center. Numerous caravans came through its gates, and as far away as traders, as far away as China, the civilization in Petra, which is part of today's Jordan. So it became a bustling commercial center during the Pax Romana. And the Romans actually built walls around the city to protect it. There's only one that remains today. It is known as the Bab Sharki. Bab in Persian means gate, and here we see a picture of it. So if we move to early Christian history, Damascus, of course, is known in its relationship to St. Paul, especially regarding the apostles' vision of the risen Christ, which we all pretty much, I think, know pretty well. With the Emperor Constantine's conversion in 312, the Christian population of Damascus accelerated because Christianity was now the official religion of the Roman Empire. So by the end of the 4th century CE, Christians accounted for well over half of the city's inhabitants. The 16th century saw increasing divisions within Eastern Christianity over a theological issue, and this was quite common at the time. Churches disagreed on what today might seem to us fairly minor issues, but enough to split these churches. And it was over Christ's nature, which involved aspects of the Trinity. Was he all man, all God? And this split with the excommunication of the Bishop of Damascus in 538. Then in the year 635, Damascus was conquered by the Muslim Arab general Khalid ibn bin Walid. Initially, the city remained largely Christian. The governor assigned to the city was named Muawiyah I, who was later chosen a caliph of the expanding Umayyad Empire. So this was the Umayyad Caliphate, which was, if you see on the right, it's a little bit blurry, but you can see where Syria is and where Damascus was. That became the center of the first great Islamic caliphate, the Umayyads. And it didn't take long for them to spread all the way along the coast of North Africa, as you can see, sometimes more into the heartland of Africa, all to what is today called the Mirab, Tunisia, Morocco, up into Spain. This was the great Umayyad Caliphate centered in Damascus. Arabic was then established as the official language, giving the Muslim minority of the city an advantage in administrative affairs over the Aramaic-speaking Christians. And anytime your language is the official state language, you are going to have all sorts of advantages, which will increase your population as well. It was during this time that we found the beginning of the construction of the Grand Mosque of Damascus, known as the Umayyad Mosque, which began in 706 and was completed in 715. And we're going to have an opportunity to look at this in much greater detail shortly down the road. So then in 1174, Saladin, hero of the Third Crusade, arrived in Damascus with his army. 4 days later, after a brief siege, installed himself in the city castle and received the salutations of the inhabitants. So he became the ruler of Damascus and much of the surrounding areas, as we will see shortly. Interesting, he died in 1193. There are interesting stories about him. It is said that his possession at this time of his death, and this was, remember, a major leader, governor close to a caliph with great wealth at one time, he only had 1 piece of gold and 40 pieces of silver. Just 1 second, my phone's ringing. Sorry about that. Forgot to pull out the phone. Too much technology. In any case, he died a pauper. He left, according to tradition, all his wealth to his subjects, so much so that he didn't even have enough to pay for his own funeral. He was buried in a mausoleum in the garden outside of the Umayyad Mosque. And again, we'll visit this site shortly. So then in 1516, the Ottomans conquered Damascus. This is the great Islamic Caliphate that's centered in Constantinople, or what would become Istanbul. And it may remain in control of Damascus for the next 400 years. Under its rule, Christians and Jews were allowed to freely practice their religions. However, there was a massacre of Christians that took place in 1860 in Damascus, when fighting between what are known as the Druze, see them on the left, they were a sub-branch of Shia Islam, and the Maronites, a sub-branch of Syrian Christianity, who were primary in Lebanon, that both of them were in Lebanon, which we saw was just to the west of Syria. It spilled over into Syria, and there were persecutions on both sides. The Christian quarter of the old city of Damascus was actually burnt down. The Ottomans were Sunni, and they tended to oppress the Syrian minority, which was Shia. Now, just briefly, I think I've talked about this a number of times in other classes. The major division within the Islamic world is between Sunni and Shia. The Sunni are those who believe that the legitimate leadership of the community after the death of Muhammad should have gone to an individual named Abu Bakr, who was chosen by Muhammad's major companions, who came from all the various tribes. The Shia, on the other hand, believe that the leadership should have gone through family lines to Ali, who was Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. Ali was married to Muhammad's daughter Fatima. And this set off controversy in the Islamic world, which lasts even up until today. And we can still see it expressed in what happens in Iraq periodically. In any case, the Ottomans were Sunni, and they were more or less persecuting the Shia minority. Percentage even today is about 76% Sunni and only 13% Shia. Keep that in mind as we will get to a moment what the political situation is at the current situation in Syria. So during the early years of the 20th century, there was a lot of anti-Ottoman nationalist sentiment. Now, since they were Sunni, most of these were nationalists. They just opposed being ruled by Turks. And there were marked demonstrations, as seen here, an early picture of a major demonstration in Damascus. Then during World War I, 1918, as the war was drawing to an end, Arab forces led by T.E. Lawrence, if you've seen the movie Lawrence of Arabia, and the British Imperial forces led by a General Allenby, as they approached the city, residents began firing on the retreating Turkish troops. 2 days later, the Arab leader, seen on the right here, Faisal, was proclaimed king of Syria. Why did that not last? Well, there had been a secret agreement between the British and the French in 1917-18, known as the Sykes-Pico Agreement, whereby the powers, these two powers, arranged the partition of the eastern lands of the Ottoman Empire between the two of them, whereby the French got control of Syria and Lebanon, and the British got control of what was called Palestine and Iraq. This is called the Mandate period. In any case, this forestalled any move towards Syrian independence. Faisal was later made king of Iraq by the British, but it was always held by most Arabs that he had been promised Syria as a result of joining the war effort against the Turks. Problem was, there was no signed agreement. And in Arab culture, a man's word was all that was needed. You didn't need a signed agreement. It was considered a matter of honor. Well, in any case, there are many historians that look back at what happened after World War I as the root cause of so many of the issues that we have in the Middle East today. So in any case, the Versailles Conference granted France a mandate over Syria, but nearly all the Syrians were hostile to the mandate, and there were numerous insurgencies. Here you can see at the top here, Turkish troops with prisoners and those who had been executed below. So it was a period of much conflict, internal conflict, major insurrections in both 1925 and 1927. Then in September of 36, Syria and France negotiated a treaty of independence, and it looked like Syria would get its independence. However, the French legislature refused to ratify the treaty, and with the fall of France in 1940 to the Nazis, Syria came under control of what was known as the Vichy government, which was pro-Nazi, and thus any move towards independence was delayed. French troops remained in Syria until 1946, when continuing pressure from Syrian nationalist groups and the British finally forced them to evacuate. Actually, the British and the French had gone in 1941 after the fall of Vichy France. But in 1946, we finally get Syrian independence. And this left the country in the hands of a republic whose government had its capital in Damascus. The next 15 years were characterized by political instability, numerous coups. Some said the country is going cuckoo. Anyway. And then we got the settling down of all that when one Hafez al-Assad took power. He did so in 1970. He was originally defense minister. There was a coup in which he took power. He was a Shia Alawite. So he represented only 13% of the country. The other 76% were Sunni. In June of 2000, after he died, his son, Bashar al-Assad, took power, and he has retained that power up until today, despite the civil war that has racked Syria in the last decade and continues in pockets until today. So it's important to realize that the Assads are Shia. So you have an example of a minority ruling over a majority, the exact opposite of what one had in Iraq, where Saddam Hussein was a Sunni and a minority, only 20% of the population, with the Shia, 80% of the population. Generally, countries, when there is strong religiosity that have minorities in political control, there's going to be a high degree of instability. Okay, that gives you a little bit of the history of Damascus and Syria, a conflict-ridden history. So let's now move to our tour of it. So like most Middle Eastern cities, Damascus is divided into the old and new cities. On the left here, you see the larger metropolitan area. And if you look right in the center, there's a little box that says Old City. So as in Jerusalem, the Old City is actually quite small compared to the new city. And over on the right here, you see, like Jerusalem, it's divided into a number of quarters. That's how old cities in the Middle East were. You had quarters usually based on religion. So here's the new city and the old city. One of the oldest religious sites in Damascus is the remains of a temple of Jupiter. You can see it on the right here. It was built by the Romans during the reign of Augustus. Today, it's the entryway into one of the great souks or bazaars of the Middle East, the Al-Hamidiyya souk. Now, there are numerous Christian sites within the old city, and perhaps the most well-known is the Al-Mirab Mosque Cathedral. Mirab meaning that it's named after Mary. There's also St. John's Church, St. Paul's Chapel, and the house of St. Ananias, all of which we will be seeing. So this cathedral is one of the oldest Greek Orthodox churches in the world. It was originally built in the 2nd century CE. After the Muslim conquest of Damascus, the church was closed until 706 CE, so for about 500 years, when in 706, the Caliph ordered it returned to the Christians. This was done as a compensation for the Church of John the Baptist, which was turned into the Umayyad Mosque. So it was a trade. We'll give you back the cathedral and we will take over one of the churches, and we'll see how that ties in with St. John the Baptist shortly. So concerning this church, the 12th century Muslim traveler and geographer Ibn Jubayr wrote, "Inside the town, there is a church which is very important to the Christians. It is known as the Church of Mary. It is second in importance only after the Church of Jerusalem, which would have been the Holy Sepulchre. It is a beautiful building and includes miraculous pictures which appeal to mind and eye." In 1342, the Patriarchal See of Antioch was transferred to Damascus, and the church served as the major seat of the Greek Orthodox Church. It was burned down along with most of the Christian quarter in the previously mentioned Druze Maronite conflict that had spilled over from Lebanon. It was rebuilt 3 years later and renovated in 1953. So nearby to Al-Maya is the modest church of St. John of Damascus. It is a Greek Orthodox church dedicated to Yohanna Mansur bin Sardon, one of the most important figures of Eastern Christianity during the Umayyad period. He later became known as St. John of Damascus. He was famous for his religious writings, both in Greek and Aramaic. Ottoman officials granted the property to the Greek Orthodox Church in 1856, and the building was constructed shortly reconstructed shortly thereafter. You can see back on the wall here various icons and pictures of saints. So to the southeast of the St. Mirab is St. Paul's Chapel, or the Chapel of St. Paul. It incorporates materials from the Bab Queson, or the Queson Gate, the ancient city gate from which Acts 9:25 claims Paul was lowered out of a window to escape persecution. Many of you may remember that story. The historian Ibn Asakar says there was a mosque located at this spot, which had formerly been one of the 15 churches in which Caliph Omar allowed Christians to worship. But by 1885, the mosque was in ruins, and it was purchased, together with the surrounding area, by the Patriarch of Antioch, known as Gregory Joseph. On this land, this new chapel was erected, whose walls incorporated, like we said, the ancient gate. It was inaugurated in 1939. As you see this, the table in the middle here, this is where Mass will be celebrated. It's still an active chapel. Turning north past the eastern gate, we come to the house of Saint Ananias, also called the Chapel of Saint Ananias. Who was Ananias? It was Ananias who is claimed to have baptized Paul into, Saul at the time, into his new religion. There's an underground chapel that is alleged to be the remains of the home of Ananias. You see the three pictures on the wall. We'll give you a little closer view. These are the pictures, although they're hard to make out in this. On the left, the conversion. On the center, the baptism. And on the right, the escape. So you find these pictures on the wall of the chapel of St. Ananias. Archaeological excavations in 1921 found the remains of a Byzantine church at this location, dating from the 5th or 6th century, adding some evidence to support local tradition that this church actually has a very early origin. There are also Christian sites outside the city proper. The convent of St. Felka lies in the village of Malula, which is 45 miles northeast of the city. According to legend, St. Felka belonged to a noble Roman family. Desiring the Christian life, at the age of 18, she broke the engagement her father had arranged for her and fled from her home. Her father sent Roman soldiers to pursue her. As they were closing in upon her, she had crossed the third range of the Kalamun Mountains and reached the vicinity of Malula, like I said, which is about 45 miles outside of Damascus. She found the way blocked by a rocky height. Just at that moment, and this again is tradition, she began praying for God's mercy, and the barrier was miraculously divided, allowing her to pass through into a grotto where she lived for the rest of her life. And this convent is built in that grotto and is still an active convent for nuns. Turning briefly, oh, here's another view of it. You see I love this tree branch here. So turning briefly to Judaism, there's I'll say was now, and you'll see why in a moment, a famous synagogue in the suburb of Jobar. If you look at the map and you see where the old city is, right in the middle, and then just go up and to the right, you'll see the suburb of Jobar. The synagogue was built atop a cave, traditionally thought to have been a spot where the prophet Elijah once rested. Earliest verifiable literary sources indicate that it was at least medieval in origin, that's the synagogue, and had been a place of Jewish pilgrimage for many centuries. It is said to have been the place where Elijah anointed Elisha as his successor, as recounted in the Book of Kings 19:19. And this is supposed to be the spot where that took place. The synagogue was destroyed in March of 2013 during the Syrian civil war. Both rebels and the Syrian army have accused each other. World media claim that it was probably the Syrian army hitting the synagogue while targeting a nearby rebel enclave. Although there's also some evidence pointing to rebel forces who are also in the synagogue area. So if we back up, this beautiful synagogue turned into this. Okay, as one might expect, Damascus contains a number of grand mosques. The grand mosques are known as Friday mosques. This is because Friday is the Muslim holy day, Saturday Jewish, Sunday Christian. And this is when the great or grand mosques were capable of holding many worshipers. People would go there to celebrate or to worship together. And of those mosques, the most famous was the one we mentioned earlier, the Umayyad Mosque. One of the largest, oldest mosques in the world, and considered by some Muslims to be the fourth holiest place in Islam, after the grand mosques in Mecca and Medina, and we should know this after last week, the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Umayyad Mosque was built between 704 and 711 on the site of a former Christian basilica. It's often common, that had been dedicated to John the Baptist. Remember the trade I mentioned earlier? The historian Khalid Yahya Blankenship notes that the field army of Damascus, which numbered about 45,000 soldiers, were taxed a quarter of their salaries for 9 years to pay for its construction. Coptic craftsmen from Egypt, as well as Persia, India, Greek, Morocco, were all brought in, both as architects, designers, and laborers. Overall, 12,000 people working on the building of the mosque. Now, what's interesting, especially from a Christian point of view, the mosque is believed by Muslims to be the place where Jesus, known in Islam as Isa, will return at the end of days to confront the Antichrist. In Islamic eschatology, or end of time stories, Jesus returns along with the Mahdi to restore righteousness in the world, and he is the one who actually takes on the Antichrist. By some estimates, the original mosque had the largest area of mosaics in the world, covering approximately 43,000 square feet. Byzantine artists were employed to create the mosaics, which depict landscapes, buildings in a characteristic late Roman style. The mosque was severely damaged by fire in 1893, and we actually have this old photograph of after the fire, and had to be restored. Since then, it has undergone several major restorations. One in 1929 during the French Mandate, two others in 1954 and 63 under the Syrian Republic, and two more in the 1980s and 1990s under Hafez al-Assad. The large courtyard occupies the northern part of the mosque complex. In 789 CE, the governor of Damascus constructed what is known as the Dome of the Treasury for housing the mosque's funds. You can see the elaborate work. Now, this has been restored a couple of times. The courtyard also contains what is known as the Dome of the Clock. It rests on an octagonal base mounted on 8 columns. The columns are topped with white marble capitals. You can probably see those. It originally contained a water clock. Now, I tried to do some research on this to understand how it worked. And to be quite honest, it was too complicated for me to understand. So if you want to do your own research and find out how these ancient water clocks work, you're welcome to do so. But it seems that it was a very complicated procedure. So within the complex, there are 3 major minarets. A minaret is where the muezzin calls the faithful to prayer 5 times a day. Now, in the modern world, there'll be a loudspeaker up here at the top. But in ancient times, the individuals would go up and would actually call with their voices the faithful to prayer. The original mosque did not have any minarets. They were added in the 9th century, and the first was whoops, the Minaret of the Bride. That's this one here. According to local legend, the minaret is named after the daughter of the merchant who provided the lead for the minaret's roof, and who was also married to the governor of Damascus at the time. So that's the Minaret of the Bride. The Minaret of Jesus is located on the southeast corner of the mosque complex. It's 253 feet in height. It was built in the year 1247. It is believed it is from here that Jesus will descend back to earth at the end of time. The third minaret, known as the Minaret of Cape Bay, was built by the Sultan Cape Bay in 1488. It is octagonal in shape and built in receding sections with 3 separate galleries, as you can see, if you go up. We'll now go inside. Here is the prayer hall. And what is known as the Mirab. The Mirab in a mosque is a concave area, indentation in the wall, which shows the direction to Mecca. So you see some of the prayer mats in front here, which would stretch all the way back into, you see the area here. It's surrounded by a little white fence, but on a full day, this entire carpeted area will have believers, and they will face the Mirab, and going backwards, which is the direction of Mecca. Now, this is an interesting photo. The original Mirab was known throughout the Islamic world. It's described as magnificent. We no longer have that. It was destroyed at one point, likely in the fire. This is, in an earthquake before the fire. This is the Mirab that was existent just before the fire in 1893. The mosque is also known for its dome, known as the Dome of the Eagle. The dome, as always in a mosque, will be atop the center of the prayer hall. So when you look up at the dome, you are looking up into the heavens. That's what these symbolize. And they're magnificent. The grand mosques of the world all have great domes. Now, the interior also contains the shrine of John the Baptist. This was the reference earlier. The Muslim historian Ibn al-Fakir tells the story that during the mosque construction, workers found a cave-shaped chapel which had a box containing the head of John the Baptist. Upon examining it, the conqueror of Damascus, Al-Walid I, ordered the head to be buried under a specific pillar in the mosque, which was later inlaid with marble. So this is believed to be the shrine of John the Baptist, which is believed, at least traditionally, to contain his head. When Chris and I were in Siena years ago and visited the great cathedral there, we were able to see what was claimed to be the right arm of John the Baptist. So relics play an important role in most religions, sort of downplayed in conservative Islam. But here we see right in the middle of a mosque, the shrine to John the Baptist, which is said to contain his head. Actually, Pope John Paul II visited this mosque. And it was in the year 2001. He visited specifically to see the shrine of John the Baptist. But what might be more important historically, it was the first time a pope paid a visit to a mosque. So he actually entered the mosque, and here you can see he's surrounded by both Islamic and Christian dignitaries. The mosque also is of great significance to Shia Muslims. Remember, they're about 13 to 15% of the population. As this mosque was the destination of the Imam Hussein's kin, who were made to walk from Iraq following the Battle of Karbala, where the Imam was slain and decapitated. That was the first great attack by Sunni on Shia. The Imam Hussein was martyred, his head was decapitated, and it was taken to this mosque. And this is a plaque that supposedly demonstrates where the caliph at the time posted the head for months afterwards. Today, there's a shrine within the mosque where the head of Hussein is said to be located. So the Umayyad Mosque has two heads in it, John the Baptist and that of the Imam Hussein. And here's a night view of this mosque. So just behind the mosque is Saladin's mausoleum. Remember earlier I mentioned Saladin. He was the great Sunni Kurd who became the first sultan, ruler of both Egypt and Syria. And as mentioned previously, he led the military campaign known as the Third Crusade, which drove the Christian Crusaders out of Jerusalem. At the height of his power, his sultanate spanned Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Western Arabia, Yemen, and parts of North Africa and Nubia. And he made Damascus his capital. He died March 4th, 1193. And as we said, he is said to have died in poverty. His son built a mausoleum, and this is where it is said that he is now interred. It was completed in 1196. Now, who's this gentleman? This is German Emperor Wilhelm II, who rebuilt Saladin's tomb in 1898. He actually financed its repair. Why did he do so? He wasn't a Muslim. Well, there may have been more practical aspects. His donation was not only aesthetic in purpose, and he probably, being a military man himself, honored Saladin's great military prowess, but it was also meant to strengthen friendly relations between Turkey and Germany, because the Ottomans controlled Damascus at the time. These were the years when the Berlin-Baghdad Railway was being prepared, and German investment was directed towards that end. So take which story you like, or both. Here's inside the mausoleum, this gorgeous lamp, and the tile work behind. The interior holds two sarcophagi. You can see one on the left and one on the right. The original is a wooden tomb, richly decorated with geometric astral patterns. This holds Saladin's body. The second is a marble coffin, which was a gift from the just mentioned German Emperor Wilhelm II. And on the right here, you see some of the detail work with the calligraphy on it. So a short distance from the Umayyad Mosque is the Sayyida Ruqayya Mosque. It is a Shia mosque, and it contains the grave of Ruqayya bint Hussein, the young daughter of the Shia Imam Hussein, who we just mentioned, who was martyred at Karbala, an event that is commemorated every year in the Shia world, known as Ashura, A-S-H-U-R-A. So before proceeding to say a little bit more about this mosque, let me say a little bit more about Ashura. On Ashura, Shia Muslims observe a complete day of mourning and wear special mourning attire. It is believed that mourning in this way allows them to wash away their sins. A popular Shia saying has it that a single tear shed for Hussein washes away 100 sins. Elegies are written and recited by poets. For example, here's an example of one of such elegy. He who was a light shining is murdered in Karbala and unburied. Descendant of the prophet, may God reward you well. May you be spared judgment on the day when deeds are weighed. I swear by God, never will I wish to exchange marriage with you for another, not until I am covered in the grave. O Hussein, never shall I forget you. He whom they abandoned in Karbala, may God now never water the plains of Karbala. There are a number of public rites that take place during a memorial service. Congregates come together in a mosque for sorrowful poetic recitations, lamenting, grieving, beating of drums, chants of Ya Hussein. Mullahs or religious leaders, as one seen here, give sermons related to the event. There are passion plays known as tazieh, which recount the story. And then for some, there is flagellation. Generally young males, adolescent males, and it's believed to be a way of directly experiencing Hussein's pain. So returning to the mosque and the story of Ruqayya, after enduring the Battle of Karbala and the tortuous journey to Damascus that followed it, she died at the age of 4 in the caliph's prison, where her body was originally buried. Years later, upon the flooding of her grave site, the grave was opened, the body removed to the site where the new mosque now stands, which was built in 1985. Here are some of the portions of that mosque. Here is the courtyard. Notice the gorgeous calligraphy in the white and blue above the arches. This is the thing, actually, these tombs in Shia mosques, which very conservative, especially the Wahhabi Sunni Muslims, really are opposed to. They call this shirk or polytheism. because there is only one who should be worshiped, and that is Allah. And they believe that the tombs to these various martyrs become a form of polytheism. There's another famous Shia mosque in just outside the old city. It's actually located in the suburb of Sid Zainab, which if you see, look at the bottom of the map, just to the right of the green section, Sid Zainab. This is another Shia mosque, and it is to Zainab, the daughter of Ali and Fatima. Because remember, Ali was the Prophet Muhammad's cousin, and Fatima was Muhammad's daughter. Thus, Zainab was the Prophet's granddaughter. Like other members of the family, she was taken to Damascus, and she was captured. And when the Caliph then held sort of an audience. Now, she was a grown woman at the time, not like the young child. She spoke out when the Caliph spoke. And the Caliph, according to tradition, said, "Who is this arrogant woman?" She rose to answer and said, "Why are you asking them, the other women? Ask me. I am the granddaughter of Muhammad. I am the daughter of Fatima." A man at court then asked the Caliph to give him one of the women as a bondswoman, and he gave Zainab to him. The man subsequently freed her, but she died a year later. Some sources say due to illness, others that she was assassinated by the Caliph's soldiers. The tomb became a center for Shia religious devotion in Syria and a destination of pilgrimage for Shia Muslims throughout the world, especially Iraq. The present-day mosque contains the tomb. It was built in 1990. And it is known for its majestic dome. As well as its exquisite tile work. Zainab's final resting place is enclosed within the cage-like structure found directly beneath the dome. On the morning of September 27, 2008, a car bomb attack took place at the intersection leading up to the mosque. And on June 14th, 2012, its town became a target of a suicide bomb attack. Again, to show you the continual conflict that takes place in the Islamic world between Shia and Sunni. So to the northwest of the city is what is known as Mount Queson. Highest point is 3,776 feet. And the mountain is steeped in religious significance. In Islamic lore, it is said to have been inhabited by the first human being, Adam. And there are various stories about Abraham and Jesus having prayed here. It is mentioned in medieval Arab history books as having been the place where Cain killed Abel. Known as the Cave of Blood, the spot has a small mosque atop it. You can see this small mosque at the top of the picture. And beneath that mosque is supposedly the rock or the place where Cain killed Abel. Further down the mountain, there's another cave known as the Cave of Hunger. I could not find a photograph of it, where 40 saints are said to have died from hunger. At the foot of the mountain is located the shrine and mosque of one of the most famous Sufi mystics, Muhammad Ali ibn Arabi. Known as the reviver of religion and the greatest master, he was born in 1165 into the Moorish culture of Andalusian Spain. So he was from Spain initially, the center of the cross-fertilization of Jewish, Christian, and Islamic thought. He wrote over 350 works, including an exposition on the inner meaning of wisdom of the prophets in the Judaic, Christian, Islamic line. He also wrote some of the finest poetry in the Arabic language. His writings express what is known in Islamic Sufi theology as the unity of being, the single, indivisible reality, which simultaneously transcends and is manifest in all the images of the world. Thus he wrote, "It is he, Allah, who is revealed in every face, sought in every sign, gazed upon by every eye, worshipped in every object of worship, and pursued in the unseen and the visible. Not a single one of his creatures can fail to find him in its primordial and original nature." The notion of the unity of the soul with the divine, Allah. He believed that man in perfection or impossibility was the complete image of reality. And thus he said, one who truly knows one's essential self knows Allah. He traveled throughout the Muslim world, spending time in Mecca, Palestine, Iraq, and Syria. His last years were spent in Damascus, where he died in 1240. And we'll finish up just by looking at the interior. And his shrine. Okay, so that finishes our tour of Damascus. Let's see if I can get out of my, there we go. And next week, we're going to be traveling to India, to the great Hindu holy city of Varanasi. So let's stop for a few moments, see if there are any questions, comments, thoughts. I open the floor to you.
So looking at the pictures, as much as I noticed, I didn't see anything in the way of fences or protection around the mosques.
No, well, you know, during the Civil War, there would have been troops around them, that's for sure. But I haven't seen pictures of fences around them, but they would have been well guarded.
I've only visited one or two mosques, and your pictures reinforce it. I'm amazed at when they decorate, there is so much design, there's so many lines, there's so many concepts that are expressed, and yet they seem to fit together, no matter how different they are, one row from the other. And we don't do that in Western design.
You know, they're beautiful works of art, if nothing else. I mean, I consider them sacred spaces as well, but I think it's indicative of the notion of worship that went into the construction of these buildings, just like the cathedrals in Europe. These were buildings that were were done for the sense of worshiping the divine, not for practical purposes. So you wanted to make sure that whatever you were putting in that building was like an offering. You were offering this up to Allah in the Muslim case, or to the Christian God in a Christian sense. So I think we've kind of lost that sense. Most of our architecture is very pragmatic. We're not offering it up to anything but the corporation that owns it or whatever. But yeah, these are, and pictures really don't do these justice. You have to see these. Unfortunately, in many countries at the moment, many mosques are not open to non-Muslims, and that's been a result of the conflict that's taken place. If you do go to Morocco, as Chris will testify, there's a magnificent mosque there that you can go into. It's bigger than St. Peter's. If you go to Iran, you can go into many of the mosques, or at least into the courtyards and see the architecture, etc. Yeah, they're beautiful works of art, if nothing else.
I think also in answer to Bev's question that since in Islam you cannot portray Muhammad or other human beings, they really worked on geometrical shapes,
yeah.
And made that a very fine art.
Yep.
So yeah, they're beautiful.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Bev, those shapes flow together as a unity, because that's what they're supposed to represent, the unity of the divine. So that's how it's set out for those. The calligraphy flows. If you look at it, they curl around. The words curl around into one another. Most people who speak Arabic can't read the calligraphy. You have to know that school of calligraphy, and there are numerous schools of calligraphy that became outstanding schools of art throughout the Islamic world.
I guess because I grew up in a Protestant world, I find, as opposed to Catholic Christianity, I find this relic thing. I can't wrap my mind around that. I don't want someone's dead head. I don't want their arm. That's not part of my growth or my process.
Yeah. Yeah, and part of your Protestant heritage. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, you find in relics aren't just in, normally you don't find a lot of relics in Islam in general, because more conservative Islam is a little more puritanical. But in Shia Islam, you will find, and this is why many of the Shia are considered heretics, you will find relics, you will find these shrines to various saints and martyrs. And some have said perhaps this, because Muhammad and Allah are so remote in many ways, that for Shia Muslims, these ideas of saints and martyrs, it brings it back to a more organic feel for the religion. Whereas also I think you find in certain elements of Puritan Christianity a rather remoteness. I won't name where we were, but Chris and I had the opportunity the other day to be in a small Protestant church.
I knew you were thinking of that.
In Camarillo. And there was nothing on the walls, no pictures, nothing. A small cross on one end of a very, I must say it, bland area. But that was part of the puritanical Protestant movement that wanted to get rid of all of that other stuff because it took away from the glory of God. I guess it depends on one's taste.
And actually what Bill and I said to each other was, don't we love the cross at our church?
Yeah, I often, I mean, one of the outstanding things I think about our church is that gorgeous cross. And I don't know if you've ever noticed, but take a closer look next time. It, to me, comes close to a crucifix. Because if you look at the bottom of it, and I don't have a picture of it here, It looks like 2 feet coming out. And if you look at the top, you could see, if you wanted, the sort of head at a bit of an angle. I mentioned this to Elbert the other day, and he looked up at it and he said, And does everyone recognize when I say a crucifix as opposed to a cross? A crucifix, which is Catholic, has the body of Jesus on it. A cross, the Protestant cross, does not have that. So I think what's lovely about our cross is it has both, depending on how you want to see it.
I'm kind of curious about that one lamp. It was very
Emily, what?
decorative, a very decorative lamp.
Yeah, in one of the tombs, yeah.
Did they have electricity or was that candle lit?
It would have been originally candle, but now there is electricity. Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, that was one of the problems. Candles sometimes in these were causes of fire. And I think you could probably find records of some of the mosques that burnt being a result of candle fire or something getting out of control. Anyone else? Any thoughts? Okay, well, thank you for showing up. We're going to give you 5-6 days in Damascus, and then we'll be boarding a plane for, we'll fly to Delhi and take a train to Varanasi and see our last sacred site. So once again, thank you for taking time out on a Wednesday, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Have a good week, everyone.
Bye-bye.